Той е създател и на Bellatrix Test Automation Framework и на Mesa Distributed Test Runner. Говорил е на редица конференции, включително и на тази, и е носител на наградата QA на годината. Като и тази година той отново е сред номинираните.
Антон е човек, който има много страсти. Една от тях е писането. За последните 10 години е публикувал над 300 статии. Има над 1 милион читатели по цял свят.
И не само по цял свят. През последната година издаде 2 книги за автоматизация на софтуер и сборник с научно-фантастични сатирични разкази "Тестване в галактиката".
Но днес няма да ви говори за планети или галактики, а за метрики. И добавят ли те значима стойност към вашите дейности по тестване? Как да избегнете трудностите и какво би могло да подобри вашият проект? Моля вашите аплодисменти за Антон Ангелов!
Hello guys, just a personal note at the beginning. This morning during, I was taking a shower and I was thinking, well, after so many conferences, I just, like the last year I did like 7 across the world. And I'm always, excited when I speak at conferences, but like for the last 2 years I didn't have this, like a trio when I'm on stage, but I have it right now, maybe because of the masks and things. And if I have to name this conference, it will be like the end of the world conference because of the masks and stuff. Yeah, so thank you for being here and not being afraid. Really thank you. Today I will share with you we are going to talk about quality metrics that we used before in a past project in my company to improve the overall quality process. I will share with you more than, I think, 20 metrics. This is not an exhaustive list, so keep in mind that these metrics will highly depend on the tools and the process you follow and will vary from area to area. And here's a short agenda. First, I will shortly explain what TMMI is and how it's connected to the metrics. Then I will tell you more about the problem we had and just give you a high-level overview of our process. And then, of course, the biggest part of the presentation will be about, the data that we put into the books and what metrics, we calculate, etc. And lastly, I will share some considerations and tips. So, without further ado, let's begin. TMMI, as many of you probably know, stands for Test Process Improvement Model. It's something like a framework or a solution for measuring the maturity of the QA organization. I use it very often while consulting companies to measure their maturity of the process. This is a long topic. I will not talk about much about it. Just in short, I will mention, through questionnaires in this framework, you can define at which level your organization is. The first level is, when you don't follow any official QA process. The second level is where you have some practices like test plans, test cases, test execution, test environment. The third level is where you do non-functional testing, test training, reviews. The fourth is where you do QA preventative activities. It's really important. And the fifth and last one is actually that we are, where you gather the data, calculate the metrics, and use them to improve the process. The important part here is that you cannot skip levels. Many companies that wanted for me to, establish a test automation solution for them, many often they think that this will be like a panacea where will solve all of the problems. And many often I'm just telling them, okay, but first, you don't have a test plan or test cases. This won't solve the problem. It's the same with the metrics. You cannot skip the levels. If you try to incorporate them too early, this will cause more problems than solutions. Here I will describe the process that we, and basically just a side story for this particular talk. Here you can see this is like statuses from our books, like transition between statuses. I'm not going to talk about them. Especially for this particular project, I started to consult this company like 3 years ago, I think. And keep in mind that we incorporated metrics just after 2 years after the initial consulting. So this is really important. I'm not going to bother you with all of these statuses because, this is, as I said, highly dependent on your project and context. But rather, I will just give you a short overview of our overall process. When we create a new bug, usually it goes to a queue. If it's something, of course, not completely urgent that should be fixed on production immediately, it goes to a queue for the next day where we gather together QA, developer, lead developer, and product owner to a triage meeting where we get together and decide, because these bugs are not bugs yet, they're just observations for a particular problem. And we had to put some data there and assign it to someone to analyze it. This is why our first initial status is called analyzation, meaning that someone from the developers should analyze what happened and describe what is the problem, give estimations, etc. If, again, it's something not really critical that should be immediately taken care of, it goes to the queue for the next day, where when we have the estimation, we check the velocity and the planning and everything. If we have time, we put it to be fixed in this particular sprint because we use Scrum. Another important aspect of this process is that when we calculate the metrics from all of these fields and data, etc., we get together each month to, analyze what happened, to see the numbers, to try to analyze the results. Otherwise, it's pointless to, to bother with all of these data calculations, etc. So this is our process. And here, I just, added all of the, all of the fields and the data that we usually fill into our bug reports. This is the most common things. All of you know it. I just added here to show you after that even with this basic information, we can use them to calculate some metrics. What are there? For example, here on this slide, you can see a dashboard that I created. I created like a custom application where it's basically visualizing all of the metrics. It was built on ASP.NET Core, and back then we used Jira. So I wrote like a C# API for calling the Jira API. Then there was this Windows service, which was pulling the data like a couple of times a day to calculate the metrics, then putting them into a database, and then here through Infragistics dashboarding, I connected it to the database and visualized everything. It sounds more complicated than it is, but basically you can use even Excel spreadsheets or Google spreadsheets to visualize the data, that's fine. In the next versions, basically we move this to the cloud where all of the metrics are calculated serverless through Azure Functions and later on displayed through Azure Power BI. And here, basically, this first metric is grouping by severity and priority. You can group by monthly, quarterly, weekly. And even if you see spikes, this doesn't mean that it's the end of the world, maybe you just released a completely new feature that wasn't tested before, and that's fine. But this is a warning. You should analyze what happened and why. And now we will discuss other common metrics. The first one is duplication rate. Usually if you see spikes here, maybe probably you don't have good titles for the bugs, or you don't have a good dashboarding or a search. This was the case at the beginning of this project for us, because we switched from another tool to Jira. Then like 2 weeks after that, they switched completely the UI of Jira. And we had to, reinvent the wheel and create a better dashboarding with filters, and this solved the problem. But this is how we, measured it. Then, come on. The next one is the rejection rate, where basically if you see spikes, probably you have a few things can happen. Maybe you have inexperienced testers that they don't know what to put in the bugs. or you have problems with the test environment or the test data. Many things can happen here, and you should analyze them very carefully. The next one is failed testing rate. I saw this many times, and I bet that many of you did also. I had this colleague back in Telerik who was not testing at all his fixes. Like, he's fixing the bug, he's giving me, the website, and then yellow screen of that. And this usually, we can use this metric to prove to our team leads, etc., what is happening and why. Usually, between these transitions, this is how we calculate the metric, transitions between the statuses. This is how we get this. I will just click them, all of them. Then you have defect reopen rate, where usually means that probably you don't have enough unit integration tests, regression tests, and many regression issues happen over and over again. This is a way to prove it. Then you have this fixed against open rate. Usually you want to be decreased over time, or at least staying at the same level. Because otherwise, probably if this is increasing, it means that probably you have a planning problem. Like you don't have enough buffer for fixing the newly found bugs. This is a way to prove it. The next two are quite similar, average time to be fixed and analyzed. Usually you want this to be, this time to be as small as possible, because otherwise, especially for the urgent bugs and the really critical ones, you lose business. Like, for example, in a past project, I will not mention the company, there was a problem with their shopping cart with the certificate. It was expired, and for half a day, we couldn't do purchases. This is a big issue. And if it's not fixed immediately, you lose a lot of money. And then you have this remaining bug strength. Again, you want to be decreased over time. I saw in many companies that I consult that they even use it as a goal to quarter between the presentations that, the big guys with the shirts that present in front of the company, they usually use this as a goal. For example, if you have 1,000 bugs, they're telling their bosses, okay, we will decrease that to 800. And this is their goal to improve the process. Here, this basically bug taxonomy fields. These are additional fields that basically we added to the Jira bug template. This information is usually filled during this analyzation phase of the developer, and we use it to calculate additional metrics. It's quite interesting. It's a little bit like it's making the process a little bit more tedious and longer, but it's quite useful if you use it to improve the process and see what's happening. So what are these fields? First, the root cause analysis. We don't use this for calculating metrics. Basically, it's an open text field where the developer is putting information what happened and why. And usually this is invaluable information for the technical lead or even for the QA manager if they have time to analyze all of the bugs to see what happened. I use that a lot. Then you have the root cause reason. Usually this is like a category, a drop-down, where here you can have a few values. For example, missing requirements, missed during code review, not clear requirements, not enough knowledge about particular technology. Usually when you group and visualize the problems here, it's quite useful because in this particular project we noticed that many of the bugs occurred initially because the requirements were not clear enough in the stories, and we worked together with the product owners so that we can describe them a little bit more so that developers know what to do, because we have a lot of junior developers that just have joined the company, and it was a quite complex product. Then you have the root cause type. This is something a little bit more technical. Here we specify the technical area of the bug. For example, whether it happened into the database, into the UI components like widgets or third-party components, or for example in a microservices or third-party integration with something. Many often at least back in the days in Progress, in my team, we worked in a really complex system of systems, which we had to integrate with so many moving parts and systems, and many of the bugs happened just because of this kind of integration and timeouts and stuff like that. So here you can use this information to see where is the more technical problem. Then you have the bug appearance phase. Here we mention usually during which phase of the process the bug happened and when we caught it. For example, dev testing. Then we have system testing, user acceptance testing, exploratory testing, automation. For example, if your UI tests haven't caught a single bug for 2 years and you have a lot of them, you know, maybe you're not checking the right areas or you're not doing the right assertions, but maybe definitely there is a problem. And this is a way to see whether the investment is okay or not. Then this one, the bug origin, we can move it and merge it with the bug appearance phase, but I like to separate this. This is usually have only 2 or 3 values, and it's basically describing whether your clients code the bug on production or you code the bug during your internal QA process. And usually the industry standard for this should be below 5% of all of the bugs found. Then many of the bug tracking softwares right now have this to mention in the bugs which functional area the bug is in. This is quite useful to see, you know, bug trends for particular area. But even if you see spikes, I saw this many times in this particular project, it's not the end of the world, because sometimes if you, especially your company is small or the team is small, usually the whole team is working on this particular area for half a year, and then you see just the spike because nobody else is working on anything else, and that's fine. However, if you have more teams and many QAs, then this can be invaluable information to see, for example, areas that need to be refactored or you need more regression tests there. And rejection reason, of course, you can see many things that can happen. For example, as I mentioned before, inexperienced testing, not well described titles, problem into the test environment, test data, and so on. Other helpful metrics that I saw in other projects, rollbacks per month. I haven't used that, but for a company that we work right now, they use it quite often because they have many moving parts with microservices and stuff. Also the same for each particular application over month, and they use this as a goal between the quarters so that they want to decrease this. Then you have a rate of delivery for the stories. This can be quite useful, but it really depends who is writing the stories, you know. And I like really these 3. Because many companies want this from us to establish a test automation, you know, practices. Every time the managers want, for example, to use code coverage to measure UI tests, which is like, yeah, you can measure unit tests, but imagine code coverage for UI testing, even for this big project that we are working on right now, most of their logic is into the database. Okay, but code coverage is measuring, you know, only the server code. And for me, it's like useless to do that. And this is why I prefer these 3 metrics here, planned automation against what is automated actually for this particular sprint or quarter. Then when you sit together, or your QA manager or technical lead, whatever, we sit together for this particular functionality and we define all these user actions that you perform in this functional area. For example, you can have, I don't know, for this particular project, we have 300 user actions per functional area. And then you strive to cover them with automated tests. Yeah, this is a manual work. It's not automated through a tool like the code coverage, but it can be quite useful. It's maintained over time. And then you can, again, I saw that in this particular project, we use this as a goal instead of just measuring the code coverage. Yeah, considerations and tips. First, keep in mind that if you try to incorporate this kind of a metrics, usually, at least this happened with us too. initially your data will be empty. Like, for example, if you haven't used this field, when you start calculating, many of the books for the past 2 years won't have this particular data. And you should consider that when you calculate the metrics. You should ignore that, of course. Also, you should make sure that these particular fields are required. Otherwise, I saw this at the beginning, I haven't put all of the fields required in Jira, and many of the developers just skip them. And this is, again, just it's ruining the whole calculation of the metrics. Then it's not enough to have only articles or presentations in front of the team. You need to convince them why it's good for them and how this will make their life easier over time, etc. This was part of my job, during the dailies, coffee breaks, lunches, etc. I was just convincing them over time why this is good. I did like a pair filling of bugs with them. Like when they don't know what to put into the different fields, I just sit with this particular developer and I fill it with him and I'm explaining why this is so. It may be vastly, you don't need to use this data to create tension between developers and QAs or punish people, because I saw this many, many times and it's ugly and shouldn't be done. Yeah, before moving to the questions, I just wanted to mention this about the books. Many of you that participate in QA Bulgaria Facebook group already saw the post. Basically here, there are only a few books because of the COVID situation, there was a problem with the printing in Amazon. However, many of you that, want to participate, donate, and then receive this as a gift, there will be a second initiative where you can just make a donation and drop me a line, and there will be an event where you will receive the book. And while I'm doing this, we are living in tough times, and I usually participate in such things like donating blood or planting trees, etc. But I saw that many people were, just thinking about themselves, etc. And I wanted to use the things that I write to inspire people to build a better society, not to fear, not to be angry, just to make something good. Because, there is so much anger on the protests and there are so many bad things happening right now. And I think that we should support each other. Yeah. Anyway, time for questions.
И така, време е за вашите въпроси. Any questions? Докато вие в залата се осмелите, имаме вече два въпроса в Discord. Първият е: Is there a dedicated team or person responsible for the analysis part of the process?
Usually the QA manager or the QA lead, QA architect is responsible for, for this whole process. I think this is, again, if you have this ISTQB advanced level certificate for the managers, this is the part where I learned for the first time for these things. So this is a QA manager job. Yeah.
Okay, I will fake that I understood anything. Okay. And the second question: Who participates in defining the user actions and functional areas?
It really depends. For this particular project, because my company is working for many different companies and I don't know every time the domain or their things. Usually it participates, for this particular project, their QAs many QAs participated, so that with their QA manager or whatever, and they were responsible for working with their, because it was legacy app for 20 years, there were so many things, many of the people were, changed over time. There were certain areas that, for example, only one person that is working to the support understands what is happening. So it's a matter of context. It really depends.
Thank you. The reason to have metrics in place and analyzing will lead to punishment for some of the teams or project functionalities. What else we do metrics for? Разбрали ме?
Да. Yes. As I said, I was trying to explain every time for each metric for what we use it. It's not about punishing every time. Yeah, of course, sometimes we can punish someone who is not doing walkout testing. Yeah, you can do that, like a few times, you know. There are certain people that shouldn't be in the team. I'm just taking my last words for the punishment sometimes. But as I said, we usually use these metrics to improve the whole process. For example, you can see that you need a better dashboard, or you see that you need to teach someone what does it mean to test, you know, locally, and that maybe he needs a test environment, or you need to fight with the administration to give you a test environment if you don't have one. Yeah. So it's not only about the punishment.
Thank you.
Any questions from the room?
Yeah, we can talk during the break, that's fine. I mean, I even prefer it.
Have another question from Discord. Who provides the metric data for the QA manager to analyze them? Разбрали ме?
No.
Who provides the metric data for the QA manager to analyze them?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, this is like automated process, meaning that, as I said, this is automated tool that it's gathering the data automatically from Jira. It's like in our case, this was a C# code for calculating all of this automatically. So basically, this is not a manual process. However, in this particular company that I was referring to, the second one, their QA manager was responsible for manually gathering all of the data and calculating this by hand. So sometimes this is a manual process if somebody don't know how to do it technically, and that's fine.
Thank you. And the last one is a file about triangle. Where do you decide is bug confirmed, rejected, etc.? Who is decision maker? Whose word should be final?
It really depends. Like, this is why we have a triage meeting we decide as a team. Like, sometimes I don't know pretty much the domain for certain things, and maybe the technical, if it's something more technical, really deep into the code, then the last word is for the technical lead. Sometimes it's the QA manager. Sometimes if it's a bug, not a feature, it's for the product owner. So it really depends on the context, but we decided as a team, not just like, this is a bug, you should fix it, you know.
Okay, thank you. Благодарим на Антон за лекцията и за
Аплодисменти.
благородния жест. Аплодисменти!